So I wanted to give you now another voice from history, Flavius Josephus. Flavius Josephus. Historians tell us that he was born about 37 of the current era, approximately 5 years after the date of the crucifixion, and therefore did not know Jesus. And he wrote history books, books that are claimed to be the most accurate of any, detailing events of the first century and events leading up to that, the wars of the Jews and the antiquities of the Jews. And although we're told that he was probably very well educated, for some reason Josephus, writing his Antiquities approximately 94 of the current era, latter part of the first century, after the destruction of Jerusalem, and yet he doesn't know anything about the Septuagint. Very strange. Josephus, in his own words, in the preface to the Antiquities of the Jews, states that that is one of the reasons why he is writing this work, that he is urged by people to do this, because people are not only curious about this war that his people had with the Romans, but were very interested in the history that led up to this. They wanted to know the history of the Jews, and they were unable to read it because it was not in Greek. And so let me read this to you, and you can check this out online, although I'll do a little jumping around here to save some time. But what Josephus has to say contradicts what other historians have told us about the Septuagint, it being a complete copy of the Old Testament. And if Josephus is correct in this, how could Paul have quoted from the Old Testament if it did not yet exist? How could Paul and Jesus Christ and all the other writers of the New Testament be quoting from the Septuagint if it did not yet exist? How could the writers of the New Testament have been writing earlier than the time of Josephus, when he is stating in 94 AD or CE, whatever your preference is there, that the Septuagint didn't exist yet? How could they have been quoting from a book that didn't exist yet, and yet Paul was supposedly long dead? Good 30 years before Josephus wrote this book. But this is the third chapter In the preface to Antiquities of the Jews by Flavius Josephus, I found therefore that the second Ptolemy's was a king. This is Ptolemy the second that I was just telling you about in my previous video here. Second of the Ptolemy's was a king who was extraordinarily diligent in what concerned learning and the collection of books, and that he was ambitious to procure a translation of our law and of the constitution of our government therein contained into the Greek tongue. And now Eleazar, the high priest, knowing that the custom of our nation was to hinder nothing of what we esteem ourselves from being communicated to others. Accordingly, I thought it became me both to imitate the generosity of our high priest and to suppose that there might even now be many lovers of learning like the king, for he did not obtain all our writings at that time. But those who were sent to Alexandria as interpreters gave him only the books of the law. And while there were a vast number of other matters in our sacred books, they indeed contain in them the history of 5,000 years, in which time happened many strange incidences, many chances of war, great actions of the commanders, and mutations of the form of our government. Again, Josephus, speaking of the king, Ptolemy II, said he did not obtain all our writings at that time, and then points out again that the other writings that he did not obtain contain 5,000 years of our history. So this basically is Josephus saying that quite possibly all that was translated for Ptolemy was Leviticus, possibly Deuteronomy, the law itself, and the constitution of their government, but not the history. Certainly he isn't picking up with Joshua at that time, because he's stating that these other books contain 5,000 years worth of information. At any rate, Jesus and Paul are not quoting just from the first 5 books of Moses, if you want to argue that when Josephus was talking about the law, he meant the Torah or the Pentateuch, the first 5 books that were attributed to Moses. Even with that view, that would state that prior to his writing, no other translations existed in Greek, and this is why he states the reason why he is writing the book of Antiquities. Certainly, if the Septuagint had been around for nearly 350 years, Josephus would have known about it. Thanks for listening.